computer. Hi, my name is Wendy from Sunflower Publishing, and today I have a very special, well, I always have a special guest, but today is no exception. So first of all, let me introduce you with a short bio. Tell me if I get the name right, won't you? Siobhan.
Right?
Yeah, okay. Siobhan. Yeah, it's nothing like how it's spelt, is it? Really? Right, Siobhan.
No, no, it's one of those Irish names.
Siobhan is a British historical fiction author, a lover of all things Italian. Perfect. She lives in the Veneto region of northern Italy with her husband, a dog, and a Siberian cat. We'll come to those later. Siobhan was born of English parents in Hong Kong, attended boarding school in Australia, and then moved to the UK, where she taught modern foreign languages in a Welsh high school. We'll come to that later. Now she spends her time writing page turners and living the dolce vita sweet life near Venice. Her novels are compelling, yes, poignant and deeply moving. Yes, with strong characters and evocative settings, but always with romance at their heart. That's a lovely introduction, isn't it? I couldn't have done any better if I'd written that myself.
Oh, thank you.
So, welcome. And where should we start? Can we go back in time slightly and look at these cultural influences that you've had on your life and how that's got to where you are now, if that's okay?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I was born in Hong Kong,
Yeah.
and spent my primary school years there pretty continuously, except for short holiday, well, long holidays when I was younger, because my father worked for a Port of Hong Kong Authority company,
Right.
um, because he was in the Navy during the war and demobilized in the Far East. He got a job working for the Chinese Maritime Customs in the late 40s, and then he met my mother and found a shore job in Hong Kong. And in those days, because everyone traveled by ship,
Mm,
they used to have long leaves.
right.
And so rather than go back to the UK, where it was cold and there was rationing and life was pretty miserable in those days, my parents decided to go to Italy on their long leaves. And the first time I went to Italy, I was 6 years old, I think, 5 or 6 years old. And my parents rented a house in the most magical setting you can imagine, Positano.
Yes.
And I can still remember it. It was just amazing. I learned to swim off the Pebble Beach and just lived a magical summer. We had a wonderful maid called Lucia, and she would take me out in her brother's fishing boat. And I
Right.
remember we would pick, I don't know what they were. They were sort of like mussels off the
Okay.
rocks and just eat them raw. Pick them and eat them raw, and it was just a wonderful memory. And then back to Hong Kong for a few more years, and then the next leave, I was nearly 10 years old, and we went back to Italy again. But this time, my father, he was a businessman, but he was also an artist, and he'd been given a commission to paint a mural for the Hong Kong Hilton Hotel, and quite a chunk of money. And he wanted to buy a property for his retirement. And they decided to look at the Ticino around Lake Maggiore.
Right.
So they rented a house near the lake. And so I had another magical summer when I was 10, swimming in Lake Maggiore and just enjoying. So,
I should have renamed this the cultural influences in your life. I
yeah,
think
yeah,
really.
yeah. I had a lot of influence of Italy from a
Yeah,
very early age.
yeah, you
My
did.
parents didn't buy a property in the Ticino because it's Switzerland, basically,
Yeah.
very expensive.
Mm.
But they went to Venice with friends for a long weekend, leaving us with a babysitter. And on the way back to Lake Maggiore from Venice, they stopped off in Asolo, which is a beautiful village, almost a big village. I wouldn't call it a town, it's a big village, which is truly stunning. Um, and they fell in love with it and bought a property near there. So from then on, it was always holidays near Asolo, which is halfway between Treviso and Bassano del Grappa.
So
Um,
this Italian influence was there from such an early age
it
then.
was,
Wow.
but there was
Wow.
also growing up in Hong Kong as well, which was
Yeah. Yeah.
another
Yeah.
massive influence on my life.
Yeah.
And the first book I wrote, I wanted to pay homage to my mother's background in Hong Kong
Right.
because
Right.
she also had been born in Hong Kong. Her father was an engineer, and he left the UK after the First World War
Hmm.
in the early 1920s to work in Hong Kong. And she'd grown up in Hong Kong.
Gosh.
And, and at the at, and they also they would go on long leaves to the UK and to visit family, always by ship. Can you imagine how long it took in those
You
days?
know, for the rest of us at school in the UK, well, I was brought up in Manchester. I
Yeah,
don't think I'd even heard of these places, you know,
I
and apart
know, I
from
know.
when we just had an odd geography lesson and this is the map. I mean, you were there, you were there living it, let alone just
But for me, it was just completely normal. You know,
exactly. But
it was
as I
the
say,
way,
yeah,
and
for the
everyone
rest
I
of us,
knew.
it's
Yeah,
just looking, you know, doing this on the globe, just thinking, oh, yeah, that's there or that's there. I mean, how absolutely marvelous.
it was truly amazing. My mother, though, had she was with my grandmother and my grandfather setting off on one of these long trips, and they decided to go via Australia and Canada. And then the Second World War broke out, and they were in Australia.
Right.
And my grandfather had to go back to Hong Kong. And at that time, women and children were being evacuated because they thought that the Japanese would eventually Hong Kong because they'd already taken large parts of China. So he went back to Hong Kong, and my grandmother and mother were in Sydney. And my mother went to a school that was also a boarding school. My grandfather had set up a trust to pay for the fees. And then my grandfather became ill with tuberculosis. So my grandmother went back to Hong Kong to look after him. The Japanese invaded, and they were put in one of these horrific civilian internment camps for 3.5 years. And my mother didn't see her parents for all that time.
Goodness.
And my grandfather, my grandparents, my grandfather didn't live very long after the war because he'd suffered so much. They
Yeah.
were basically starved in
Yeah.
this camp. And my grandmother wouldn't talk about it, but she would never buy any Japanese products or go into any Japanese shops. And I used to wonder about this, you
Mm.
know, that she could dislike the Japanese so much.
Gosh.
And
And
then
this
as
was
I,
your world. This
yeah,
was
yeah, and as I
unbelievable.
grew up, I started to learn more about what happened.
Yeah.
There's a funny message on my screen. I just want to get rid of it if I can. No. Yes, it's better. Yeah, so as I grew up, I learned more about what had happened in the war. And then there were programs on TV like Tenko. I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, my poor grandparents,
This
what
is
they
the
must
sort
have
of
gone.
thing they would have.
Yeah, yeah. And so after my grandmother passed away, I read about what happened in Hong Kong. And a friend of mine, whom I'd grown up with in Hong Kong, he married a local Chinese girl, and there was a lot of sort of whispering, and because there was so much racism in the society at that time. The two cultures barely mixed. My parents did have Chinese friends, and they would be entertained by them and entertain them. But I didn't have any Chinese friends when I grew up.
No.
Very few. There were some Chinese children at my British school, but they wouldn't know they had to speak fluent English before they were allowed to go there, and they had to pass all these tests. And as a child, it didn't sort of occur to me
No.
that that was wrong because that was the way things were. But as I grew up, I and became more
Aware of
aware of
yeah,
things.
yes.
I felt very sad that I hadn't had the Chinese language. I
Mm.
hadn't learnt it. I hadn't. And we had Chinese armors, which are like nannies, and people helping us in the home. And they didn't speak to us in Chinese. They spoke to us in a sort of pidgin English. So we learned this sort of, sorry, my cat has just decided to grace us with her presence with a
Oh,
big
I
buff
can just
tail.
see a tail go.
He always wants to be in on everything. Yeah, so and I thought, this would make an interesting book, but I had
Yeah.
no idea how to write it.
Well, I was
Um,
going to say, so at what point was there any family members who were literary? Was it the books that you were read?
I
How do we
read
get from
avidly.
how do we get from
Yeah,
where you grew up to writing? What
yeah.
yeah, what
Well,
did
I
that?
had a childhood friend who became a published author,
Oh, right.
and Adam Williams,
Okay.
and he wrote the story of his family at the time of the Boxer Rebellion, influenced his book. It wasn't their story; it was fiction. And I thought, yes, that's an angle. I can't really write my grandparents' story because it's too close to home, but I could fictionalize it. And um, and then I started the long, tortuous road of learning the craft of writing because you think, oh, I'll write a book, but it's not as easy as
Well,
that.
yes, I mean, I'm not a writer. Yeah, I talk to a lot of them, and what's interesting is how authors get started. Is it what happened in your childhood? Who did you know? What did you read to make you think, yeah, I want to do that. I can do that.
Yeah,
Tell me about
I
the
used to,
books then that you would have
well,
been reading as a child in
well,
your
yeah,
school.
I read avidly. As a child, of course, we all started with Enid Blyton.
Okay.
I saw people of my generation
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
loved I remember
Yeah.
devouring the Magic Faraway
Yeah.
Tree.
Yeah. You'll be going to see the film then, won't
I
you?
know, I wait. I hope they don't ruin it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I moved on to the Narnia Chronicles,
Right.
which I absolutely
Right.
adored. I used to imagine myself as Lucy, and I would have loved to have had
Yeah.
an Aslan in my
Yeah.
life.
Finding that wardrobe.
Yes,
I
yeah.
still do that.
Yeah, yeah. I used to go for walks in the countryside and imagine, ending up in an alternate world. And that's also a little bit like when you do write, when you do create this world of your characters, it's like you've created a Narnia, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's not your real reality, it's an alternate reality. And so yes, and then as I grew up, I read a lot of romance. I love Gone with the Wind, and I just can't remember now. I've always had a book on my bedside table, and always would be reading something.
One of my questions was actually, and I know I
Mhm.
sent you this list, what was your favorite childhood book? Can you pin that down for me?
But it has to be The Lion, the Witch, and the
Or the
Wardrobe.
wardrobe, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
has to be that. Yeah.
Which is children, which is, like you say, an alternative world.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you would have chosen that one, really.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. The fantasy element, the world
Yeah.
that you can create through writing, which is
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
the craft of it, the clever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I loved also I love I loved Barbara Erskine. I love The Lady of Hay.
Right,
And so I enjoy reading these time slip novels. So when I started writing, I, w I was teaching. So I was leading a very busy working life. And I used to just be able to write on the weekends.
right.
And
So what were
I
you
would,
teaching? What were you teaching?
I was teaching Spanish and
Right,
French
right.
because I had the Italian background. I learned Italian at school. I went, I did a stint at the Italian University for Foreigners in my gap year. And then I wanted to become an interpreter actually, because I loved languages and I thought, that would be a
The way
good way to
forward.
use my languages.
Yeah.
But I'd gone to boarding school in Australia and I wanted to go to the interpreter school in Geneva, but my qualifications from my boarding school in Australia weren't accepted unless I did A levels.
Okay.
So I did a correspondence course and French and Italian A levels, but there was a postal strike on at that time. And of course, it was no internet to do, courses.
To do these things.
Yeah.
Oh God.
So I did take the exams,
Yeah.
but I needed to get an A, B, or a C, and I had a B in Italian and a D in French. So I
Right.
couldn't get into the interpreter school. But I did a business course, bilingual, in Geneva instead, and that gave me bilingual secretarial qualifications. Went back to Hong Kong, and because I'd grown up in boarding schools most of my life, I thought I didn't really know my parents very well.
Okay.
And I thought it'd be lovely to just live at home for a year and work in Hong Kong, which I did. And it ended up being 8 years, not one.
And do you have siblings as well?
Yes, yes,
Oh,
I
right,
have a
right,
brother,
right.
a younger brother and a younger sister. And my brother's now retired and lives near us in Italy. So I see quite a
Right.
lot of him. It's great. My sister lives in Scotland, but she also has a place in Italy and comes over in the summer. So Italy is very much a part of our lives.
Your lives. Just referring to the book, I really, I mean, I mentioned authenticity, which is there more than, in most books that I read, because you live in Italy
Yeah.
and you have the affinity with the languages. But the Sicilian language, I just wanted to mention at that point, the
Yeah.
words were quite similar to Italian words, weren't they? I've
Yes.
written a few down.
Thank God for the internet, actually, because I
Oh,
went
yeah.
on the
I was
website
going to ask.
for
You were,
attack for Sicilian phrases. Yes.
I was going to say, how did you, if you haven't lived in Sicily,
No.
how did you know what all those words and phrases were? Oh, you kind of, that was just part of the research then.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yes. I don't have any Sicilian background. No.
No, no. What
They are similar.
aren't they? Amori, love.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Spelt slightly different, but I think if you had a bit of Italian, which I do, that then
Yeah.
you would get to that word, wouldn't you?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. They're very similar. There are words that are entirely different
Yes.
as
Yeah.
well, but
Yeah.
I didn't want to write a book that had too much Sicilian in it in
No.
case I got it wrong. Because there'll always be somebody, some reviewer, who will say that she got the language wrong. I made that mistake with my Tuscan Orphan book,
Right.
where I used some Texan phrases,
Mm,
and which I also researched.
mm.
And somebody critiqued those, so I thought, no, I'm not going to go too overboard with Sicilian
Good.
phrases.
So let's go back then
So
to
I wrote my debut book was
was, yes.
which I self-published,
Right. Okay. How did you find that process?
the
The
Orchid
authorship.
Tree. Yeah,
Right.
that was my debut novel.
Lovely cover.
Yes, I my advice to anyone self-publishing is you've got to spend money on a good cover
Good
because a
advice.
cover sells a book.
Yeah.
A cover sells a book. And also, so whilst I was learning the craft of writing, this book took me years and years and years, as it was my debut novel. I went through the Romantic Novelists Association New Writer Scheme,
Okay.
and I think I submitted it to them twice. I got masses of advice on the manuscript. I also joined a peer review site online, which was called You Write On.
Okay.
I think it has changed from when I was on it. When I was there, which was, I think I joined it around 2006, it was. It was great because you would upload the first 7,000 words of your book, and people, other members of the site would read and review it for you. And you did the same for, it was random which books you would be
Right.
allocated.
Right.
But you had to reciprocate, otherwise your book wouldn't be given to others to read.
Okay.
And I met a couple of authors on that site who are now still friends. One of whom was Anne Bennett.
Right.
She writes historical fiction as well, and she's now been published by Bookouture. But we've become really good friends, and she and her husband visit us every year. And it was, it was just such a great thing to have done, and gave me a massive impetus because I got good advice, I got
Mm.
praise as well as criticism, and it just spurred me to carry on, carry on, carry on. And I submitted the Orchid Tree to several publishers, one of whom sat on it for months. And in the meantime, I wrote another book while I was waiting for the Orchid Tree to come back. I wrote a book which I haven't got a pic. It was set in Asolo, near
Okay.
where we live.
Okay.
And because I love time slip stories, I
Yes. Yeah.
decided to write one of those. And I had a modern day character and the lady in waiting
Okay.
of the Queen who had her court in Oslo during the time of the Renaissance. And that I really enjoyed writing because I learned so much about this Queen whom I'd heard of but hadn't really studied at all. And eventually, when I'd finished it, and I met a fantastic editor through You Write On, John Hudspeth, who'd been on that site, and he then set up an editing business. So he edited the Orchid Tree before I sent it to publishers, and he also edited. I started calling it In My Lady's Shadow. It had several names, In My Lady's Shadow, and then I changed it to Lady of Oslo, and I changed it to Lady of Venice. Anyway, long story short, Bolwood are republishing it for me this coming
Oh,
summer.
right. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anyway, so that I decided to self-publish. And then when this publisher whom I'd sent the Orchid Tree to, my cat's making a noise, sorry, hadn't got back to me, I decided to self-publish that as well. And then I wanted to write the book. the, sorry, I was always fascinated by the partisans
Oh, right. Okay.
on Monte Grappa, the mountain
Right.
behind where we live.
Right. Right.
So that started me writing the World War II
Yeah.
historical fiction.
Yes.
And I wrote The Girl from Venice, which I self-published, followed by The Girl from Portofino and The Girl from Bologna. And then out of the blue, I was approached by Emily Yao of Bulwer Books, who was starting their historical fiction list. And she asked me if I would be interested in working with them. And I had a long think about it because I was doing quite well
Oh, with the
with the
self-publishing. Right.
self-publishing. I
Right.
was doing, absolutely fine. Um, but I thought, I'm not getting any younger, and it would be nice to have all the marketing,
Mm.
the
Mm.
covers, and all the editing, and all
Yeah.
of that
Right. Right.
taken off my shoulders.
Did
And
that also, I mean, publishing world, roots to publishing, having a publisher like Baldwin, it's the holy grail. It's what people, the golden chalice, it's what everybody strives for.
yeah,
But do you think that once you have that contract, can you do 3 books, please?
yeah.
Does that validate you as a writer then?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It does.
yeah,
Because although although indie publishing, as we call it,
yeah,
um, and so everyone else calls it self-publishing, authors know that those who are successful in that field
mm,
are good writers, otherwise they wouldn't be.
mm.
The rest of the world thinks you're just a vanity publisher. So
Yeah, I think it's a hard one, isn't it? It's
yeah,
something that we discuss a lot on the writing retreat. And I mean, I kind of say to people, look at these routes to publishing.
yeah.
It's not
And it can
just
lead to being picked up
oh,
like I was.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There is no one size fits all. I mean, I've
No.
even come across a lovely lady, a writer. She's got a contract now with a publisher, and she started off as a book reviewer. And she just happened to meet someone at one
Yeah.
of these literary events. And she said, well, I'm just a reviewer, a blogger. And this lady said, oh, well, send us something. And then just said, yeah, love your writing. Can you do 3 books for us? I mean,
That's
you,
wonderful.
you just have no way of knowing how
No.
that's going
And
to
there
work.
are these incredible stories of people who
Absolutely.
picked up like that. But
Absolutely.
I wouldn't say that it's not a good thing to self-publish because you can be
Yeah.
extremely successful. And there's this multi-million sellers like
Yeah.
Colleen Hoover,
Yeah.
people like that who've done extremely well. And I met a lot of authors who've been very successful. And Anne Bennett, my author friend, she's hybrid. So she writes European historical
Right.
novels for Bookager, but she self-publishes her historical books set in the Far East. And she's done really well with them.
So when you go to parties and when people say, and what's your profession? And you say, I'm a writer, do you still get a kick out of saying that to people?
Italy. In Italy, there is sort of a reverence towards writers. I don't know if it's I don't think it's the same in the UK. Oh, è una scrittrice.
Yeah, I'm
And it
sure
makes
it's a wonderful, it's certainly a conversation starter, isn't it, really, for you? So just going back to the girl from Sicily then,
yes.
you did a huge amount of research for
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
didn't you? And, it started,
I'll show you the cover.
oh,
It's
it's
absolutely gorgeous.
wonderful. It's
Yeah.
absolutely lovely. I had never heard of that. Oh, what did you say it was called? I've
The
forgotten.
Balio.
That's right.
Well, I hadn't either until I went on my research trip to Sicily
Mm.
with my husband Victor and the dog Teddy, who goes everywhere with us. And we booked a stay in a couple of agriturismi
Yeah,
because we always try
yeah,
and stay in agriturismi because it's a way of getting to know people and
yeah.
to talk about
Sure.
places. And they were all called Balio. They were called Balio this and Balio that. Shh.
Yeah, I didn't know that word, and I thought, gosh, I've never come across that. I mean, the book for me was a wonderful piece of writing because it opened up a world. I mean, yes, I live in Italy and I've been a teacher here for many years, so I know I mix with Italians all day, and yes, we do talk about mafia, and yes, it exists, and all the rest of it. But in your
Yes.
book were certain things that I hadn't come across before that I found fascinating, like now, am I pronouncing this right? Omerta.
Omerta, yes, Omerta.
Omerta.
Well, that
That's
without Omerta, the mafia wouldn't exist.
no, no.
It was
And
it's
that,
the code of silence.
absolutely, the code of honor, the code of silence, had that not existed, could that have changed what happened in the book?
Oh yes, it was
Yeah,
absolutely, it was the cornerstone on which,
crucial.
yeah, it was crucial because the Omerta, this big hidden
Omerta.
secret,
Okay.
the Omerta, the
Omerta.
secret at the core of the book was
Right.
as a result of this. Yeah. And, I found it in several sources. So it really, and even, when my Italian friends asked me, what are you writing now? When I was writing The Girl from Sicily, I was saying, oh, it's a novel set in Sicily and it's a little bit about the mafia. Mafia, be careful. Don't let anyone know you're writing about the mafia. Even here in the north, where
Really?
it isn't prevalent.
No, no.
Be careful, be careful. Don't put
Right.
any real mafiosi in it. But you
What
didn't.
were your impressions of Sicily? I mean, I've been several times. I absolutely adore it. It's
Yeah,
quite a unique um,
yes,
island, isn't it? Because of the
yes,
influences it's had over
yeah.
the years, and
It's fascinating.
quite different. I mean, I'm in the middle here in Abruzzo. So
Yeah,
I suppose we have a slight influence. I mean, we're neighbours with Puglia, we're neighbours with Le Marche. These are my neighbours. Um, but I always felt that when I go to Sicily, it's quite a different. It's the world of Montalbano, and
absolutely.
it still seems to
Yeah,
exist as
yeah,
that,
yeah.
doesn't it?
It
Really,
does.
in a
It
way.
does. Well, we kept to the areas where my book was set
Yeah.
because we didn't go to the very touristy parts like Taormina. We didn't
No.
go up Mount Etna. We just kept to Palermo, Agrigento, and
Yeah.
then in the middle where the story is set. Um, but what I really found wonderful was the people.
Mm,
They are absolutely lovely, so
wonderful.
friendly.
Yeah.
The people we stayed in these agriturismi, they were friendly, they were engaging, they were happy to talk about their lives, and they made us feel so welcome. And in general, Italians are like that, but I
Yes,
think
they are.
Sicilians are
They
even more
absolutely are.
so, even
This,
more
the
so.
idea, the dual timeline, it's a great tool for writers to build up the narrative.
Yes, to create a
It
sense of mystery,
isn't
yes,
it? Isn't it? So
it
that,
is. But it's
we
also very, very difficult to write
I
and
can
to
imagine
get
it's
done well.
unraveling in almost a two-dimensional, three-dimensional thing. It's unraveling as you read it. And what you do, or you did in several chapters, and I'd never seen that before, and I mentioned that in my review, was that
Yeah,
you use the flora and the fauna from one timeline to another. And I
yeah,
thought, I'm reading about Lucia, and she's outside the balio, and there's a falcon flying ahead. And then we move forward to Jessica, and Jessica stood outside the balio and the falcon. And I just thought, oh my God, that is so clever. That
I,
is so clever.
I didn't, because sometimes when you read these dual narratives, you go from one timeline to another and you can
Yeah.
feel jolted.
Yes.
You can feel, oh, I was in that story
Yeah.
and now I'm in this other one, and I feel a bit jolted from one to the other. And I tried to think of a way to link, because sometimes people use the tool of a diary or letters.
Yeah. To
And
do
I
it.
didn't have those
No,
because
no.
there was no contact with the grandmother. So I thought, well, how do I do something that's going to make
To
the
pull
chapter
back together,
go?
to
Yeah,
connect. I mean, I use the example of the ants,
yes,
and it was,
yes.
it was, I mean, I found myself going, ants. Oh, we started the next chapter with the ants again. So you can imagine both women separated by time,
Yeah,
stood outside this wonderful house,
because
looking
the
at,
ants are always there,
and I thought,
and
gosh,
they're always falcons in the sky.
I thought that's incredibly clever. I mean, it really was a beautiful book. I certainly commend you on the research that you did. And tell me how long from forming the idea to actually getting the book to the manuscript part. What are we talking of? How long was that?
Usually I'm given between months.
Oh, it's not long, is it?
No, Bible would from one book to
Yeah,
the
yeah, right,
So the idea came to me as I was finishing the book before, which was The Daughters of Tuscany.
right.
Um, I and I thought I started reading. Actually, no, it came to me before that, indeed. Even before I started Daughters of Tuscany, I was chatting with my brother-in-law, who is, an historian, uh, taught history in high school. And I said, oh, I'm wondering where to set my next book after the Tuscany one. And I said, oh, I've always fancied doing a research trip to Sicily. And but I
Any
don't know,
excuse would do here.
any excuse would do, you know.
Yes, to go to
And
Sicily.
And I said, but I don't know much about what happened in Sicily. I know that, that the Allies landed there and they conquered it quite quickly and then moved on to the mainland. And he said, oh, yes, very interesting. He said, the there's there is a thought that they conquered Sicily so quickly
Mm,
because they were helped by the
because,
mafia.
yeah,
And I thought,
yeah,
that would make an interesting
yeah,
angle.
absolutely. And
So,
then
but I needed
so
to
then
do a lot of
the light,
research.
it's a light bulb moment,
It
I
is a light moment. But
think.
I was doing The Daughters of Tuscany, so I wrote that, and then when I'd finished
Yeah.
that, but you finish a book, you send your manuscript in, and then a month later you get the structural edits,
Oh,
which can
wow.
take several weeks, and then a few weeks later you get the copy edits, which you have to go through, and then after that you have to proofread. So even after you've sent your manuscript off, there's at least another 3 months.
It's like homework, it still keeps
Yes,
coming
it
back.
comes back. Yes,
I
corrections.
think that the books, the historical fiction books, and certainly with your book, you do get this sense of irony that um, Lucia had been born in America.
Yes,
But once she had to come back to Italy because of the family situation,
yeah,
and then war breaks out, suddenly she's on the wrong side.
yeah, yeah.
There is such a sense of irony there that, I mean, war changed the world for everyone. I know that, but it's so sad that for so many years then you can't get back. You can't get back. You're just locked then,
Yeah.
aren't you? And you
And into
just have
this
to hope.
grinding poverty. That was another thing.
Absolutely,
That was another
absolutely.
thing. That was why the mafia rose,
Yeah,
because of the grinding
absolutely.
poverty. And there was this hold on the people by those who had money,
Yeah,
the rich landowners.
yeah.
It was a very feudal system that went on for a long time.
You have elements in the book. We've got Sicily, and we have a tiny little bit in New York, and then we have Bristol. What Bristol and New York? Was that just from the imagination, or did you know?
And Bristol was because we lived there
Oh, right, okay. So, right,
for a
okay,
while. We lived there for about 9 years, I think it
right.
was. We moved around quite a bit, but
Yeah.
yeah, we lived there for 9 years.
And New
New
York?
York because of the mafia,
Right, right.
and the assistance given to the Allies by the mafia in Sicily was because of their connections with the mafia in New York.
Yeah.
And I thought, I may as well start the book with
I
this background.
Really clever, really, really beautiful. And I want to ask you, one of my questions is,
Mm.
does writing energize or exhaust you?
It exhausts me. It totally exhausts me.
I mean, I just can't imagine coming up with the plot and you have to do the research. Wow, it must
I
take
know.
so
When
much
I
out of
finish
you.
my a writing stint, I absolutely have to have a glass of wine
Or a
and then watch
or
TV and do
two.
something completely mindless.
Yeah, I can't imagine it. You're pouring out your soul, everything that you've got there in your, yeah, imagination. Um, an author and a pseudonym. Where do you stand on that?
It depends what you're writing.
Okay.
Um, some authors have different pseudonyms for different genres that they write.
Would
Um,
you do that? Would you, you know,
yes, if I decided to write a dirty book,
oh, keep me posted. You'd have yeah. Have you come across Catherine Metzer-Kappa? You must have done in um oh, what's Catherine written? I'll send you a link to
yeah,
Catherine. And she has written, she doesn't call them dirty books, she calls them her saucy books.
yes,
So if she writes a saucy book from, she lives in not the Venice side, but in northern Italy.
yeah.
Yeah, she uses pseudonym, so I just wondered how you
Yeah.
kind of
If I had time, I would,
yeah,
because they make a lot of money.
I'm sure they do. Yeah.
I did actually for a while toy with it, but no, no. It's not my writing voice, you know.
No, no. What would you say your genre was?
Definitely
Historical fiction and
women's
women's
historical.
fiction, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that's the
yeah.
genre. Okay.
Because it's romance and women like romance
I
more than
mean,
men do,
looking
it
at
seems.
the books that you have got, there is a pattern. The Daughter of Hong Kong, The Daughter of War, The Daughters of Tuscany, The Tuscan Orphan, The Girl from Portofino, The Girl from Bologna. That's your niche, really.
It's what I feel comfortable
Yeah, I
writing.
was going to say that that's the
It's
comfort zone.
I my writing comes across as more passionate when
Yes.
I'm writing this genre
Yeah.
because it's what I love.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm true to myself with it, I think.
Book reviews. How do you deal with them?
It depends. If a negative review has something positive, something to suggest,
Okay.
for example, the reviews I had, a couple of the reviews of the Tuscan Orphan that I was overdoing the Tuscan, no, not the Texan language.
Okay.
I thought, yes, that's a fair comment. You know,
Right.
at the time I didn't think I was, but it helped me not to go overboard with the Sicilian language in the next book.
Yes.
So
Yes.
sometimes reviews can help you improve your writing.
It's like being at school, and you've been a teacher, and I've been a teacher, and
Mhm.
you would never want to mark any homework and put a red line through it and say, do
Right.
that all again. The whole, and I think reviews are a bit like that in a way,
Yeah,
because you want to make you want to give a very constructive criticism. You want
yeah,
to have everything that you really like about the book, and you're not going to not like it.
no, no,
There was one that I reviewed for an American, and I'd listened to the audio book, and his narrator was an American, nothing wrong with that, an
yeah,
American, but an American who did not know the Italian language.
yeah,
So the book's set in Italy, in Tuscany or Umbria or somewhere, and the narrator has no idea how to pronounce the names, the
no,
wines. And I did say, and I said, I hope you don't think I'm being really critical, but you should have had a narrator who had an understanding of the Italian language to give
yeah,
that sense of authenticity,
yeah,
really.
yeah, yeah.
So it is hard, I think, sometimes
It
with
is, it
reviews.
is. But when the reviews are totally negative, that suggests that you didn't write the book they wanted to read, and that's
Yeah,
not your fault.
no.
It's their fault for reading your book when it
You
wasn't
had some
suitable.
excellent reviews, didn't you? I was reading through where are my notes? What have I done
Yeah.
with it? You've had some lovely reviews.
Of
Um,
the girl from Sicily. Yes, yes,
like meeting an old dear friend after a long absence, exciting, impeccably researched wartime adventure. Beautiful story with a compelling storyline that you wouldn't want to put down. And Angela, our dear friend Angela, said,
Angela, bless her.
I
Yeah.
was
Well, that review actually came from a review she did of the girl from Venice, which
right, right.
Bold lifted and put on there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But I mean, they were lovely reviews. And the nice thing is, and I've sort of said to people on the writing retreat, be careful if you are self-publishing, likening your style to other writers, because Amazon don't really like you doing that,
Mm,
do they, to a certain extent?
no.
But then on the other hand, it's really nice. And you've got in yours, perfect for fans of Kristen Hanna, Kate Quinn,
Well,
something,
Boldwood did that. I
yeah,
don't know.
no,
They think it
yeah.
helps books
Oh, it does. It
to
really
sell
does. I don't think
because
Amazon particularly like it, but no,
no,
I agree it does. Yeah,
yeah,
it does.
yeah, they put it there because they think that readers of those authors would enjoy the book. I had the most terrible review of The Girl from Portofino, which criticized me for flying my characters into Genova when it should have been Naples. They confused Portofino with Positano, and I wanted to get back to them and say, you've confused the location, but I couldn't. You can't respond to reviews.
No. So we'll just go through you've got a website,
Yes,
Siobhan
Daiko.
Daiko.org. You've got a Facebook page of the same name. You've got an Instagram page of the same name.
Yes.
All the books are on Amazon, aren't they, for anybody to
Yes, they're on Amazon. They're
have
also
them?
on Kobo,
Yeah, yeah,
Apple, because Bowl would publish
of
widely.
course, of course.
And they're also available in audio.
What's next?
What's next? I am researching what happened on Lake Maggiore
Oh, right.
during World War II. When I
Right.
was doing my research for the girl from Venice, um, I read a book about Mussolini's treatment of the Jews
Okay.
in Italy, and I came across a very sad story about what happened to some Jewish people on Lake Maggiore. I won't I won't reveal any
No, no,
details,
no,
but
no.
that prompted me to research that story, and I found out that the Germans had arrived on the lake, and um, they had killed all the Jews who were staying in hotels and villas around Lake Maggiore at the time of the armistice with the Allies, because Germany just came in and took over the north of Italy. And I watched a very interesting film called Hotel Maina, and there were some partisans in the film. So I've been researching the partisan activity of because Lake Maggiore is the top of it is in Switzerland,
Mm,
as you know probably,
mm,
and the bottom part is in Italy,
mm,
and that's where I stayed when I was a 10-year-old.
mm.
So I've
Gosh.
had very fond memories of that lake, and I was
Yeah.
horrified to read that what had happened there in the war. And so I've been researching, and it's very interesting. And I think I'm I've started writing the next book, but I'm still researching as I get on into the
I'm
story.
I'm still waiting for somebody to write a lovely book about San Marino.
Hmm.
We, I mean, I've been a few times to the Christmas market, and there was some false information given during the Second World War to
Hmm.
the Allies about arms being kept there and, and guns and all that sort of thing. But there never was. So it was bombed completely unnecessarily. So I'm still waiting for somebody to do the research. And I think San Marino is still looking for reparation from the UK because
Yeah,
they were bombed unnecessarily. But it's just Italy provides writers with such a wealth of
I
information.
could go on writing about
I was
Italy.
going to
I
say,
There's just so many stories and
yeah,
so many
still
interesting.
waiting to be written.
Yes, yes. And
I mean,
also,
I
Le
was,
Marche, there was a prisoner of war camp for British
yeah,
soldiers in not far from where my sister has her house near Fermo.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, Abruzzo, I think. I don't know. Well,
There
again,
was
it was one of those where Pescara, for some reason, the Allies had intel that
there was a very heavily fought battle, wasn't there, in
absolutely,
Bristol?
yeah. The Monte Cassino, yeah. So loads going on. So there's still so many books to write, which
Mm,
brings me to my final question.
yes,
What does literary success for you look like? Fame, money, or both?
neither.
Ooh.
The money's okay, but it's not made me a millionaire.
Well, just wait until somebody gets the film rights and then.
Exactly, exactly. And there's no fame because nobody knows who you are, you know, you're not to the news, you're not television, unless you're one of these Booker Prize authors, you know.
But
Um,
do you do a lot of self,
no, for me, it's really satisfaction, you know.
but do you go around doing book signings in Italy or
No, because
no?
although I've had three of my books translated into Italian, I publish them through Amazon
Mm,
and Kobo, and my business really is based in the UK.
yeah.
So I keep a low profile in Italy because of the double taxation agreement and
Yeah, I
everything.
know, I
You
know.
have to be careful.
I mean,
Um,
isn't there a wonderful book fair? Is it in northern Italy in kind of September? I keep meaning to go one year because it sounds so lovely, doesn't it? I
yeah,
mean, it's really quite worldwide now, isn't it? You
yes,
know,
yes.
there's,
I was approached for a literary festival near Ferrara, but I really couldn't commit myself. It was in November, and Victor, my husband, has a heart condition, and I couldn't really commit to going
no,
there for a couple of days in case, God forbid, you know, he should
yeah,
need to
of
go to the
course,
hospital or something.
of
So
course.
um, committing myself so far in advance to something like that, I thought, no, I might have to let them down, and I wouldn't want to do that.
Mm.
But yeah, yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your busy writing schedule to talk to me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking me. It's a true honor, honestly.
Well, you know, I mean, for years, I mean, well, I've been teaching obviously in Pescara for many years, but
Yeah.
I used to think Italy and books, what can I do with that? Books in Italy, it's a tricky one. And then it suddenly dawned on me that if I were reading books set in Italy and reviewing them, I would probably have quite a niche market. And it is proving,
Yeah.
to be like that because all around the world, there is such a huge market for anything set in Italy and
Yes. Yeah.
historical fiction.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's kind of, where I just started to take it. And it
Yeah.
just,
Have you heard of T.A. Williams?
I
He
have,
writes.
yeah. I've interviewed him.
You have, yeah.
I have.
Yeah, I met him at the Bulwer party last year.
Yeah. He's
Uh,
lovely, isn't
yeah,
he?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Uh,
there's also that writer in Bologna. What's his name? Tom
oh,
Benjamin.
yeah, Tom Benjamin. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
I've enjoyed his books.
there are an awful lot. I mean, I'm just really hoping. I think Tom had been approached by somebody a year or so ago. They wanted to either do a film or do a TV series,
Uh-huh.
like the Montalbano ones. I don't
Yes.
think anything's come of it, but I just
Okay.
thought, you know what? That would be really, really cool
It
for
would.
one of our writers,
Yeah.
whether they're American or, I mean, sometimes I think the only ones that seem to get past Hollywood are the Francis Mays, the Tuscan things. And much as I like those, and there is a place for those, I prefer a more realistic,
Yes.
authentic, rather than, well, if you go to Italy and you can buy a house for £5 and then suddenly you're speaking Italian within a week and you'll have a team of architects and builders and it will all be done and dusted by Christmas, and
Uh,
it's not like that, is
no,
it?
No,
It's
no,
like,
no. We ordered some replacement windows in November. We paid for them, and we're still waiting.
I mean, that's Italy, and that's why we love it. But yeah, it was lovely. I mean, you've got loads for me to read. All these books, haven't you? There are loads of them to read, really. But thank you again. I
Thank you
really,
for
really
asking me. I really
appreciate it.
enjoyed it.
I'll put it on YouTube, and then I'll put the podcast on my Substack account. And for me, for the writers that come to the writing retreat, it's so important to listen to people like you, people who started somewhere
Yes.
and the journey that they've taken. And with
And all our journeys are so different.
they are,
Yeah.
they absolutely are. Right, I'll let you go, and
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Ciao.